Imagine a world where beauty was a curse, where a child's face could mean a lifetime of slavery, not in some dystopian novel, but in the heart of ancient Rome. Beneath the golden statues, marble columns, and echoes of triumphant legions, there thrived an invisible empire. An empire not built on strength or law, but on silence, desire, and the destruction of innocence. The year is 117 CE. Rome has reached its peak. Its wealth is unmatched. Its reach extends from the wild hills of Britain to the sands of Mesopotamia. Emperors dine on silver platters. Senators debate beneath ceilings painted with gods. But behind the carved doors of their villas, something else is happening. Boys, 7, 10, 12 years old, vanish into the homes of Rome's elite. They do not return. They are not servants, not laborers. They are groomed, owned, broken. These children are bought in markets, chosen not for their strength, but for their beauty. Skin smooth, limbs thin, eyes large. The more exotic the origin, Syria, Egypt, Asia Minor, the higher the price. Slave traders knew exactly what their buyers wanted. They are not taken to the fields or mines. They are taken into palaces. There they are renamed, often given soft, Greek-sounding names to make them sound less masculine. Their old lives are stripped away, language, customs, prayers, all erased. What replaces them is obedience and silence. But this isn't just history. It's horror that was normalized, power without conscience, luxury built on stolen childhoods. In the villas of the powerful, no one questioned where the boys came from. No one asked what happened when the lamps were extinguished. In a world that worshipped beauty, these boys were trapped by it. Worshipped, yes, but also used. Let's pull the curtain wider. To understand how these boys ended up in gilded prisons, we have to understand Roman slavery itself. Unlike the racial systems of later centuries, Roman slavery was a machine driven by conquest. Every time a legion marched into Gaul, Britannia, or the East, it returned with more than just gold and victory chants. It brought people, thousands. Men, women, and children dragged across mountains and seas, sold as spoils of empire. Among them, boys between 7 and 14 stood out for the worst reason possible, not because of strength, but because of softness. Traders learned to spot the valuable ones quickly: pale skin, delicate frames, symmetrical faces. These were not children to raise. They were investments for pleasure. In the slave markets of Delos, Ephesus, and Rome itself, boys were displayed like livestock, inspected, measured, touched, teeth checked, eyes examined, skin pressed, buyers circled like hawks. For many of these children, the last images of their old life were violent: burned villages, parents killed or shackled, homes swallowed by flames. Then, transport, naked, terrified, alone. Once sold, the breaking began. They were forbidden to speak their native language. Any memory of home had to be erased. They were trained, first in obedience, then in performance. They learned to dance, recite poems, play music. But this was not education. It was programming. The goal was not companionship. It was submission. Many were renamed after female gods or mythological figures, their identities rewritten to suit the fantasies of their owners. Some were even castrated, fully or partially, to preserve their ideal appearance. A boy who could not grow into a man would remain forever in the role he was bought for: young, soft, harmless. This was not an anomaly. It was systemic. Behind the grandeur of Roman power was a factory of silence, where boys were taught not just to serve, but to disappear. The transformation was brutal, both outside and in. From the day they were bought, the boys were reshaped, literally. Physical appearance was everything. Their body hair was ripped out with resin or tweezers. Their skin was kept unnaturally pale, locked indoors and treated with toxic white lead powders that slowly poisoned them. They were fed special diets to keep their frames slim, soft, unchanging. Even gestures were trained. They walked differently, sat differently, smiled on command, every movement designed to please, every word rehearsed. The favored ones, those who adapted quickly, who charmed their masters, were given silk tunics, sweet perfumes, jewelry. But make no mistake, these were not gifts. They were labels, markers of ownership. Some wore golden collars engraved with their master's name and instructions for return if they escaped. The unlucky ones, they were passed from house to house, abused, abandoned, punished for defiance, sometimes starved, beaten, locked away, and if they resisted too long, they vanished. Punishment was always close, but affection was a trap too. The moment a boy grew older, his face sharper, his voice deeper, he lost his value. Some were discarded, others replaced. A few were even killed in jealous rages when affection turned to anger. These boys existed in a strange, invisible category, not quite human, not fully object, worshipped and degraded in the same breath, called precious, treated as property. In public, they smiled. In private, they endured. And when the doors closed, when no one watched, they suffered horrors a few historians dared to name. Day after day, their lives followed a strict, suffocating routine. They woke before sunrise. Hours were spent on grooming, painful hair removal, scented oils, elaborate hairstyles. Their clothing was chosen not for comfort, but for allure. Bright, short tunics that showed their youth with accessories to match, bracelets, soft shoes, sometimes even makeup. Their purpose wasn't just to serve, it was to be watched. When their masters hosted guests, the boys performed like trained actors. They poured wine with careful grace. They recited verse, played instruments, sang softly in languages that weren't their own. Everything they did was designed to entertain and to tempt. They had to be beautiful, but not vain, clever, but not threatening, quiet, but never dull. It was a constant tightrope. Please everyone, upset no one. A single mistake, spilling wine, speaking out of turn, showing tiredness, could mean a beating or worse. The performance never ended, and when the night came, the curtain dropped. But the role did not. Historical sources often fall silent here. Roman historians, even the bold ones, spoke in riddles. They hinted at pleasures of the household or soft companions, but avoided saying what everyone knew. But the medical texts, the ones written by Roman doctors, tell the truth, though indirectly. They describe treated boys for injuries that had no other explanation than repeated sexual assault, torn skin, internal damage, psychological collapse. Their pain was studied, recorded, and ignored. These boys were not people to the world around them. They were consumables, and as long as they remained silent, the system thrived. Among these silent victims, one name has echoed through centuries: Antinous. He's often remembered not as a slave, but as a beloved companion of Emperor Hadrian. His statues still stand in museums. His face, carved in marble, is serene, perfect. But behind the myth lies a familiar pattern. Antinous was likely no older than 13 when Hadrian noticed him in Bithynia. Soon after, he joined the emperor's inner circle, traveling with him, dining at his table, sharing his private chambers. Their relationship has been described by some historians as romantic, even sacred. But can love exist when one side holds all the power? Hadrian was the ruler of the known world. Antinous was a boy. One could command armies with a glance. The other could not refuse a single touch. For nearly 7 years, Antinous remained by the emperor's side, an object of affection, of obsession, of control. And then, suddenly, he died, drowned in the Nile at the age of 19. Official stories vary. Accident, suicide, sacrifice. Whatever the cause, Hadrian's grief was overwhelming. He founded cities in the boy's name, raised temples, declared him a god. But in all of this mourning, one thing was missing: Antinous' voice. No letters, no words, no record of how he felt, whether he feared, loved, or simply endured. His legacy, like those of so many others, was sculpted by the hands of his master. And for every Antinous, there were thousands of nameless boys. No statues, no temples, only silence. Most of these boys left no names behind, just traces. Poets like Martial mock the Roman elite for surrounding themselves with pretty slave boys, describing their appearances with chilling humor. But what Martial called entertainment, history now recognizes as abuse. These boys were expected to perform their own degradation, to smile while being humiliated, to play along with a system that consumed them. Even medical writers like Galen and Celsus recorded their suffering, though never called it that. They treated the injuries, they noted the trauma, but they never questioned the system that caused it. They wrote of broken bodies, torn flesh, and voices silenced by fear. But they used technical language, the kind that disguises pain with distance. And the law, it did nothing. Under Roman law, these boys were not victims. They were objects, property. Their lives could be traded, damaged, or destroyed, and the only crime would be theft or loss of value. When one boy ran away, his owner hunted him like a missing animal. Another was beaten to death in a jealous rage. Neither case caused scandal, just paperwork. In legal documents, boys appeared next to horses and furniture. They were assigned monetary value, nothing more. And as they aged, when their beauty faded, they became disposable, sold, reassigned, or abandoned. In Rome, youth was currency, but like all currencies, it lost value fast. The cruelty wasn't hidden, it was simply ignored. Everyone knew, neighbors, servants, fellow citizens, they saw the boys come and go. They heard the music at night, the silence in the morning. But Rome had perfected a kind of collective blindness. As long as the streets were clean and the games continued, no one asked what happened behind the villa doors. The wealthy didn't hide their preferences. In fact, they flaunted them. Some collected boys like rare coins. Others made them part of public appearances, dressed them in costumes, taught them to speak in practiced tones. They became living trophies, symbols of status, proof of control. Behind each performance was a boy trained to disappear, taught to mimic delight, trained to detect danger in a glance. The Roman obsession with beauty was relentless, and it came with a steep price. Not for the buyers, for the bought, and for those boys who tried to fight back, the options were few. A handful ran, most were caught, branded, beaten, killed. Others took quieter paths, withdrawing inward, becoming obedient shells just to survive. A few were lucky enough to be passed off as gifts to new masters who valued their skills over their looks. Some ended up in temples, brothels, or even back in the markets, but no one truly escaped, not from the scars. Because even if they lived, they were not the same boys who had once stood in the sun before being taken. Survival did not mean freedom. It meant adapting to a world that never intended to see them as whole. Some boys lasted years in their roles. They became fluent in flattery, skilled in performance, experts in sensing danger before it arrived. They knew when to speak and when to stay silent, when to smile and when to vanish into the background. In rare cases, a favored concubine could rise in status, given better quarters, finer clothes, even private tutors. But these upgrades were still inside a prison, just more comfortable cages. Some boys were trusted enough to act as messengers, assistants, even secret keepers for their masters. They learned to navigate elite Roman households like shadows, absorbing secrets they could never repeat. Power was always within reach, but never theirs. Their identities, already erased once at capture, were reprogrammed daily. Who they had been, names, families, languages, was buried so deep that many forgot them completely. What remained was the version Rome had written for them, and that version had an expiration date. The moment a boy showed signs of manhood, broadening shoulders, deepening voice, his time was up. Some were sold to brothels. Others were discarded or pushed into menial labor, a steep fall from silk robes to slave chains. A few were murdered by their owners, their deaths written off as natural decline in value. They had served their purpose. Rome was finished with them. The silence around these boys was no accident. It was engineered. Roman historians, those who shaped the empire's legacy, chose not to dwell on this hidden cruelty. They praised emperors for their vision, chronicled wars in glorious detail, documented architecture and law, but the household crimes, barely a whisper. When mentioned at all, these boys were euphemisms, delicate attendants, companions, favorites. Their suffering was sanitized, erased in ink even as it unfolded in flesh. And yet, fragments remain. Wills and property records list them alongside goldware and land, testaments to their status as objects. Some court cases mention them in passing, always as possessions. A boy run away, a boy broken in punishment, a boy too old to sell. Medical scrolls offer more brutal glimpses. Physicians wrote of injuries common among young male slaves, documenting damage with cold detachment, torn tissue, chronic pain, mental collapse. They diagnosed the aftermath of abuse, but never its cause. Even poetry betrayed the truth. Writers like Juvenal joked about aging concubines losing favor, mocked their vanity, and detailed their replacements. It was meant to be clever, satire, but beneath the laughs was a haunting admission. This wasn't rare. It was Rome. The empire prided itself on order, on law, on dignity, and yet it normalized the destruction of children, so long as they were beautiful and silent. 2,000 years later, the stones of Rome still stand. The Colosseum draws crowds. Statues of emperors and gods rise proudly above the ruins. But beneath that grandeur lies a truth few want to confront. Because this wasn't a footnote in Roman life, it was a feature. A civilization celebrated for its law, culture, and intellect simultaneously built an invisible world where children were traded, remade, and erased. The boys were not nameless in their own time. They had voices, they cried, they hoped, they suffered. But Rome did not write their stories. Power did. And we inherited that silence. It's easy to look away, to call it history, to bury it beneath timelines and timelines of military victories, marble forums, and heroic myths. But every piece of gold that changed hands, every banquet held in luxury, every poem that sang of beauty came at a cost. That cost was stolen childhood, stolen lives. Remembering them is not just an act of empathy, it's a reckoning. Because when we confront the darkness of our past, we don't just uncover pain, we uncover warning. Proof of what power can do when unchecked. of what culture can excuse when comfort is at stake, of how cruelty thrives in the spaces where no one is willing to speak. And so this story ends not in triumph, but in truth. The boys are gone. Their names are lost. But their silence should never be repeated,